שלום לכולם, כאן אורלי בר-קימה, השראה פרקטית. ברוכים הבאים לעוד תוכנית של השראה מעשית, Practical Inspiration Show. בתוכנית אני מארחת אורחים מכל העולם, מומחים, סוכני שינוי, מנהיגי שינוי, אנשים שעושים הבדל בעולם. והיום יש לי הכבוד והעונג לראיין את דוקטור רוג'ר נלסון מאוניברסיטת פרינסטון בארצות הברית, שעומד בראש הפרוייקט התודעתי העולמי. ואני תכף אדבר איתו באנגלית. אנחנו נדבר בשיחה על מה זה תודעה, מה זה השדה המאוחד, איך אנחנו יכולים להשפיע. יש לו מכשירים שמפוזרים ב100 מקומות ברחבי העולם שבאמצעותם הוא מודד את התודעה שלנו. אז בשיחה הזאת אנחנו קצת נדבר על ענייני מדע, תודעה ורוח, איך הם מתחברים ביניהם ואיך הם יכולים לעזור לנו בחיים שלנו. אז כמו שאמרתי, הצטרפו אלינו, תהנו מהשיחה, ואני מקווה שתמצאו בזה ערך. ועכשיו אני פונה אליו באנגלית. So, good afternoon, Dr. Roger Nelson. It's great to have you here on the Practical Inspiration Show. I'm delighted that we finally meet.
Good afternoon to you too, and I'm very glad to be with you.
So you are now in, where are you located?
I'm in Princeton, New Jersey. That's a little bit south of New York City.
You had a big snow and cold this weekend.
Very, very cold, yes. It was below 0 in Fahrenheit. That means well below freezing, long way below. But only 8 inches of snow. Not so bad, and it's very beautiful because it's cold. Yeah. The snow is therefore crystalline. It's the beauty of nature.
Yeah.
The only problem is if you have to drive, and I didn't have to drive.
Yeah, and so it's an opportunity to be, a nice and cozy weekend. We also here in Israel had a very rainy, very stormy weekend, so we didn't have snow, maybe only in the north, but it was also like this homey style weekend.
Right. I think the temperatures are moderate in Israel almost always, right?
Yes,
you very seldom have freezing.
Today, 2 days after the storm, it was sunny and people were in the beach.
Well, today is a beautiful day here too. It's like I was thinking last night about the way the universe is. We humans are very logical and rational, but nature is very creative and open and beautiful. Really is, there is no logic necessarily to the way skies are blue and the clouds are white and the snow is crystalline. And that is just the way nature is, and it's really lovely.
Yeah, and I think that we should learn from it.
Yes.
It's the best teacher, So, Dr. Nelson, you are a psychologist. And you are a scientist, and you are heading, a chairman of the international project of consciousness, global consciousness.
Yes, that is my main interest in these past few years. I really think that global consciousness is already real. But it's deeply hidden from most of us. We don't know how to perceive it, but we are connected with each other in ways that I hope we can come to understand better.
Yes, so I would like to, we are talking to regular people here, not scientists, but people who are interested in these subjects. So I want to start our conversation, our interview, with a few, clarifications from your side.
Okay.
in simple human language, so really everybody can catch it, because I want that this interaction and this show will be like a bridge for people who are not scientists, but they are a part of this world and they want to understand it. And sometimes, it's hard to comprehend all this. What is consciousness? What is our brain? Where is the consciousness located? And what is the project? But first, I want you to start a little by telling me about yourself. What drew you to these subjects, and how did you become this man who is measuring consciousness all over the world? What is your passion?
This man who is measuring consciousness started out as a boy who was interested in yoga and meditation. And I never grew away from that interest in understanding who I am and who my friends are, how we connect with each other. After graduate school, I became a professor of psychology at a small college in the very far northern part of this country, of the U.S., in Vermont. And I taught there for 8 years, a variety of different kinds of courses. Experimental psychology was one of them. And when I taught that course, I said, in order to know what experimental psychology is, you must do an experiment. So my students all picked whatever they wanted to do as an experiment. If it was feasible, then they went ahead and did that experiment. And the thing that was probably most interesting to, it was most often selected as a topic, was psychic connection, the telepathic connection, the kind of thing that happens in healing, where something occurs between the healer and the healee. Something is maybe not transmitted, but created between them. And people were very much interested in those kinds of experiments. So I said, you bet. And after a few years, but it's really the unlogic of science that is looking for what is, what you can feel, what you can touch, what you can hear, what you can see in your senses. And you are saying, no, I want to check the unseen stuff. What is going underneath, It's like an opposite to science, what you're saying. Well, not exactly, because, for example, in a class like that, I would say, does anybody have a personal experience? And maybe do some kind of a demonstration. We would say, let's try to describe the kitchen in your home. This is somebody who lives in Boston, 300 or 400 miles away. And we would begin talking about how the wallpaper has a certain color and flowers, very small flowers. And there is a telephone hanging by the door. And the person whose home this is would be amazed because it's true. So we would have these kinds of personal experiences that people could describe of their own and could participate in. We'd have one person describing another person's situation from afar. So that gives a personal flavor, a kind of experiential overlay on what can turn into an experiment. So I say, all right, the next thing we do is set up an experiment where we have a person who is out in the field, maybe driving in a car for 15 minutes and coming to a place. And at that place, we'll spend time feeling what it's like, looking at all the things around. And at the same time, somebody back on the campus is trying to describe that situation where the person has gotten to. Nobody knows where it's going to be ahead of time. There's no direct connection at all, but the descriptions of the person back on the campus turns out to be surprisingly good. This is called remote viewing. Many people have heard of that. It's possible to view a situation with no technology, but to view the scene at which another person is spending some time, especially if there is a connection between the two people to begin with.
Yeah,
So if we know
it's very interesting. It's intriguing.
So this is a kind of experiment that can be done in the laboratory. It adds science to personal experience. And I have the privilege of being involved in experiments, have been for many years, doing experiments where I know all of the steps. I know the question that we want to ask at the beginning. I know the design of an experiment that could answer the question. I know what it is, how we build the instruments, if we use instruments, and so on. I know what the data are like when they are collected and how the analysis is done and how we interpret it. So I'm in such a personally wonderful position to know what the science is, but as a person who's experiencing all the steps in the science. So I wish more people could do that, because it actually, and it is possible. If you go online, there are experiments you can try. And the participation in an experiment of that nature and feeling, sensing the outcome is a personal experience that teaches a little bit more about what consciousness might be, how we are connected with each other.
And how did you get to be connected, or did you initiate the project, the Global Consciousness Project?
Okay, from northern Vermont, I went to Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton University. I saw an advertisement for a job that sounded very intriguing to me. They wanted to find somebody who was a cognitive scientist interested in the less known aspects of perception. So I thought, maybe they're talking about the sense of smell. Nobody studies the sense of smell. Or how about touch? And turned out what they really were going to do was not either of those kinds of things. In fact, it had to do with the perception of distant information, in other words, the psychic interplay of human beings with their environment. So that was what the job at Princeton was about. That was in what came to be called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Laboratory. It was created in the engineering school because people had become interested in the possibility that pilots in military aircraft might influence their instruments if they became very strongly emotionally affected somehow. So, for example, if a pilot's mother died, maybe he would be in such a different frame of mind that would do something. The mind, his or her, could be a woman pilot. The mind might possibly have an influence on the instrumentation, which is very sophisticated and sensitive.
Yes.
So we began studying in the laboratory with very simple experiments. We asked the question, could a person, simply by wishing for it, change the behavior of a sensitive electronic random number generator? A very simple device in terms of its function. It's a device designed to produce completely unpredictable sequences of numbers, like flipping a coin. Do you do that also in Israel?
Yes, of course.
Of course. Everywhere, I suppose. So this is a random process. If it's a fair coin, it will come up heads or tails equally often. And that's what a random number generator does, only it's electronic and very fast. So we can do millions of coin flips in a short time.
Okay.
So the experiment...
And the equipment was there, or you developed it?
Well, basically, the first instruments of this sort, we used commercial devices, which were designed to create random numbers for cryptography, that is encoding important materials so that they cannot be deciphered unless you have the proper code. And also for things like an interesting application was to power a machine that would shake a car that was being developed, shake it so randomly to create a kind of a little something like the terrible rough roads that car might have to drive over sometime. So the random shaking was driven by this same random device we used in the laboratory. It was a high quality instrument. Later we built our own and learned to build what you might call the best possible random instruments, meaning that they always produced random numbers unless, as it turns out, human consciousness intervened somehow.
And how did you discover it, that something happens to these measurements, to these machines, when the human consciousness is involved? Like I understand that you measure today, there are like, what, 100 instruments like these spread all over the world?
Right. Yes, there are. I'll try to answer your question about how we discovered this. Actually, we developed a new version of a very, very old experiment. People have been flipping coins or throwing bones or using yarrow sticks to make random selections for as long as people have been around. So we just made a special high-speed, very precise version of the technology that has been used forever. We used that in the laboratory and asked people to change the behavior of the machine. Turned out they could do that. Our original machine was pretty big. It was like a suitcase. And we made, because time and electronics developed, we made smaller ones. So eventually you had one, so small you could put it in your pocket.
Can you show me? You have one near you?
I do, yeah.
Let me see one. It's interesting. רגע, הוא הלך להביא לנו מכשיר, את המכשירים האלה שמצליחים למדוד פולסים. הוא אומר שזה כמו הטלת מטבע עץ אופלי, בצורה רנדומלית, בצורה מקרית, אבל הם גילו שהתודעה האנושית יכולה לשנות את התוצאה. I was trying a little bit to explain what you said in the last answer.
Okay. This is the size of random number generators now.
Wow, it's like disc on key.
Yeah, it's like a USB stick.
Yeah.
A thumb drive. But the ones that the ones we used in the laboratory were just a little bit bigger than that.
So you can plug it into any computer? You plug this into a computer and it becomes the instrument?
Yes. That little device just produces ones and zeros at high speed, and maybe 10,000 ones and zeros in 1 second. So we usually take a sample from that, and that gets recorded in a computer file, and then you can just have a sequence of ones and zeros running constantly for indefinitely. You can have it running all day long and all night long, every day of the week.
And they work,
and so
all these instruments that are spread now all over the world, they work 24/7, and they make the measurements. So they give you all the time zeros and ones. Until something happens. For example, what can happen that can make abnormal result in the machine?
It turns out that both in all kinds of events which create strong emotions. It could be positive emotions, or might be negative emotions. It might be love and compassion, or it might be fear and anguish. But events like very terrible accidents where hundreds of people are killed in an airplane crash, or hurricanes that come on land and cause the drowning and death of hundreds of people or thousands. Terrorist attacks where, for example, on September 11th, what we call 9/11, September 11th, 2001, planes crashed into the trade towers in New York and they collapsed. And New Year's, a celebration. It's like nothing important is happening, only lots of people come together and they want to spend this moment in time waiting for midnight to come for the new year to begin.
Yeah,
it's
we just had it, We just had this experience. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, so when did you first recognize that the human consciousness, when it's gathered in groups with a strong emotion, as you say, like 9/11 or hurricanes or even happy events, when did you discover that it's affecting the machines?
Well, the history requires starting in the Pear Lab. We asked people to change the behavior of the random number generator to make it produce more ones or less ones. And then as these became very small, we realized we could go into the field. We could go to a concert where thousands of people were just enraptured by the music, for example. Or we could go to a synagogue or a church and put ourselves into the situation where a very large group of people were feeling the same emotion. We're sharing a kind of presence in the world. We're becoming a group consciousness.
Like rituals.
Yes, rituals are, if you think about a ritual, it is really it's designed to bring people into the same state of mind, to make people communicate with each other in a subtle way, so that they become part of a group which has a real presence in the world. Mm-hmm. We think of that as group consciousness, and it's very powerful. So that was the second step. We took one of these devices to a ritual or to a concert, and we said, even though the people don't know the device is there, they will have a group consciousness, and it will be resonant. It will be coherent. It will be many people feeling the same thing at the same time. So there's a kind of wave-like sharing where the consciousness is no longer scattered, but now all coming together. Yeah. So that was the second step. The third step was then to say, how about a group that consisting of all the people on the planet? How about a global consciousness? Could we possibly capture the effects of a global consciousness? So I asked friends and colleagues around the world to try to collect data during, for example, this was the very beginning, during the funeral ceremonies for Princess Diana, who was killed in Paris in a car crash. She was interesting to a lot of people. I personally wasn't very much interested, but I gradually became very respectful of what she was doing, as making efforts, for example, to get rid of landmines, which were left over from various wars and all over the world. A terrible, terrible situation. And she was she was endearing herself to large numbers of people. Anyway, for whatever reasons, many, many different reasons, she was much loved. And when she was killed in that car crash in Paris, the funeral, about a week later, was expected to be attended by billions people, by many hundreds of millions.
Yeah, I think it was broadcasted all over the world in live broadcasts in television.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that meant to me and to my friends that everybody who was watching the broadcast would be seeing the same things at the same time. They would be feeling the emotions They would hear the speeches and the songs, and they would be participating together in a huge consciousness event. And so I collected data from all of my friends' machines, put it together, and when we draw a picture of such data over the time, it should just wander randomly up and down in a kind of straight level line, but it didn't. During that period of the funeral, 6-hour period, the line, instead of going level, it went up like this. Instead of being normal, it was quite out of
abnormal.
It was abnormal. Yep.
So what does it show us in simple words that that such event can do it? And if such random event can do it, you say, and we'll talk in a minute about the experiment that you did last month in Jerusalem of the nonviolence experiment with Lynn McTaggart and the people here in Israel and the movie The Field, so you can initiate this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So it has
yes, we can.
It has a value. That I want you to explain this value. What is the innovation in what you are doing?
Okay, I'm thinking what I want to do is make a kind of picture of what I think happens. Why does this random event generator care? What is going on? And so I have to go back to the individual consciousness. We think about where is my mind? And people first think, well, it's inside my head. But if you spend a little bit more time thinking about it, you realize that if you think about your mother, who may be far away or may even have died. My mother died 15 years ago. But if I think about my mother, my consciousness is no longer inside my head, but somehow extended out to connect with my memories of her, with her, actually. I may actually go back in time to the feeling, to the sensations of being in her kitchen 50 years ago when she was baking bread, that sort of thing. So my mind is not stuck in my head. If I think about you, and you are, 5,000 miles away from where I am, but I am thinking about you, and my mind is not stuck in my head, but instead is out in space, and so is yours. And even though we are aided in this case, in this day and age, by
technology,
electronics, but beyond that, even if I didn't have a picture of you to think about, I could think about you. For example, I'm now thinking about Lynn McTaggart, and my mind is connecting with her. Okay, enough about, the point is that the mind is not inside the body. It lives in the world. Everybody's mind lives in the world. It spreads out, and most of the time we're not connected to each other in any profound way, and so our minds kind of pass by each other. Our consciousness fields. But if we fall in love, our consciousness fields now begin to interact in such a way that in a sense, we create another entity, which is the couple, the two of us. If we're in a ritual situation, this, again, the individual consciousness extends out, interacts with all the other ones, but now because of the ritual, it becomes a wave-like interaction where we amplify each other and we create together something that is not present if we don't have the ritual. If we just walk into a crowd, nothing happens. But if there's a charismatic speaker bringing that crowd together, or if there's music that everybody is sharing, then our individual consciousnesses interact with each other and they build something new. And I think the same thing happens on the grand scale of the global events. When Princess Diana's funeral was happening, hundreds of millions of people were feeling the same feelings, and they were sharing those feelings across distances. Their consciousnesses were not in Africa or in South Dakota or in Tel Aviv. Instead, they were all gathered in London somehow, and participating in that event. Now, one more piece.
Yes.
So we have this random number generator. It's also connected into this network of interacting consciousness. It has a kind of fluctuating presence in the world. It's normally has no guidance and no direction. Each moment it has a future which is completely unpredictable. And now suddenly we have this field of consciousness that is available to provide information to guide or direct the future of the sequence of numbers in the random number generator. Maybe. This is a little bit, so I guess in a way what I want to say is that these random number generators are not so different from us in terms of the possibilities. They too can participate in a consciousness network or in a gathering of consciousness to become a kind of unitary new entity in the world. When we come together, we fall in love, or we come together and we share a ritual, or the beauty of a concert, or a sunset for that matter, we create something new in the world, and that is a composite interacting consciousness.
So what does it tell us? What does it tell us, about humanity, about the world, about the universe? How can we take what you're saying now, which is mind-blowing, and and use it practically in the day-to-day life that we live in? So what are you actually telling me?
Well, the simplest way is a single word, and we should practice that in every language. Love. What is love? It is a connecting emotion. Compassion is just about the same as love. We don't do compassion without somebody else, right? Or a group of people. We feel compassion or we feel love because we are inspired by other people, or maybe animals, maybe the forests and trees, or the oceans and so on. But what I think we should try to come to understand as human beings on this planet is that the best possible thing we can do for ourselves, which is also the best thing for the planet, is to learn more how to love, to learn better how to be humane human beings. In other words, practice those emotions and those states of mind that connect us with each other. That's the best we can possibly do. And we should, I don't want to be a negative person, but we're taught a lot of things that are not like that.
Yes. The world is going, to the other way, not to the way of love, to the way of violence and nuclear bombs and threats and competition and it.
There's something crazy about that, isn't there?
Yeah, it's like there is a group of people. I don't know how many in the world. I think it's becoming more and more known to more people on this planet, because as this experiment that you did, there were people from United States, from London, from India, from Arabia, Tunisia, from Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv, from all over the world. So there is a quantity of people that is like-minded in this business, that they know that we are united and we should love and we can influence by our love the planets and the universe. But it seems that, the rest of the world doesn't know it, and they are the majority.
So, so obviously what we have to do is love them more. I think you're right, and I'm also very sure, personally, that the number of the people you're talking about is growing day by day. And it's the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing there, they interlock with each other, and they are helping to create a future that is brighter. And that, I mean, the more we can do to recruit and gather friends into this operation, the better. I mean, it's like so simple in a way. And we have been taught in various countries and various different languages, we've been taught some mistakes.
Yes.
For example, many people especially in my country, it seems very, very strong. People are taught that the most valuable description of myself is that I am a strong individual. I don't need anybody else. I'm like the cowboy riding through the prairies on my horse. I can love my horse, all right, but I don't need anybody else. That's crazy. Human beings are the Greeks called us two-backed beasts. What they meant was that we belong together. We just don't survive well if we are not connected to each other. And we do very much better when we're in groups who know about interconnection, about love, about interactions for the benefit of the group. So, and one of the things, and I'm speaking to my country population more perhaps than others, we don't have to fear losing our individuality if we join a group, by no means. We can be very, very strong and clear and creative in our own direction without any loss at all if we are cooperative with other people. If we belong to a group, it does not mean, and we don't have to fear losing our individuality.
Yeah, because it's like two things that one is pulling us together and the other one is bringing us apart, because, we are born, be unique, bring your talents and bright and shine and, be your own person, your own individual. And
right.
What you're saying now that the old traditions and the sages, they said it all the time.
Oh, they did.
It's like a knowledge that was here on the planet for thousands and thousands of years, that we are one, that we should love each other, that we should connect. And somehow something happened and this knowledge was like, forgotten or I don't know what, hidden maybe, if you're thinking conspiracy, but it was forgotten.
Right. It's the secret wisdom, right?
The secret wisdom,
It is so true. Every culture, every civilization from as early as we spoke with each other has had that same understanding, that we are one, that we can help each other, we can move out, we can travel and so forth, but we are always connected. There is a kind of oneness in the universe. Some people, if you ask the theoretical physicists, what about this consciousness business? They will say consciousness is fundamental. It's where we begin. So, and that it is a definition of the universe. The universe itself is conscious, and we are just a kind of manifestation in a very particular form, very interesting, very beautiful sometimes. We are a manifestation of consciousness on this planet, interacting with each other to create something new. I sometimes think that we are, one of the inspirations for building the Global Consciousness Project was Teilhard de Chardin. He wrote beautifully about the future of man, the phenomenon of man. And he spoke about, he described evolution from the barest particles to pieces of of sand and eventually to organic gatherings, which became creatures, which became us. And he said, we think, so many of us think, we are at the pinnacle of evolution. But he said, no, there is another stage. And that stage is to become a layer of intelligence for the earth, what he called a noosphere. So that, I think, is really the destiny that we have as human beings. The idea of being separate individual islands of consciousness is something that will disappear. It has to disappear because what we're moving toward is this kind of consciousness for the earth, a gathering of consciousness to become a sheath of intelligence that is like a giant global brain or consciousness. And I sometimes think about human beings as parallel to neurons. Neurons are the tiny cells within the brain which connect with each other.
Send the communication.
Yes. Our neurons connect with each other in networks that represent what we see, what we feel, what we think, and what we say. All of that stuff is a lot of neurons connecting. And we human beings are a lot like that. There's, in fact, even a somewhat similar number, or there's maybe 100 billion neurons that do most of the work. And there are about 10 billion humans, or getting close to it anyway. Not such a huge difference in numbers. But I sometimes think that we are like neurons. We interconnect with each other, and we're getting better at it. We're becoming more and more capable of making networks which actually function and do things on the earth. And as that process accelerates, as we grow a little stronger, a little more connected, we will gradually become like the neurons become, a mind, a consciousness, a thinking creation.
So tell me, what does your scientist friends think about you? How, when they hear you speak like that, how weird do you sound to them?
Well, it really depends on which of my scientific friends, because you might not be surprised to know. I have quite a few scientific friends who are just like me. They're just as open about the possible future, which is all that is. I mean, I really am a dyed-in-the-wool, a solid, sound scientist. I like the science to be so clear that I can interpret it without any question in my mind. So I like to do an experiment where everything is well understood and well controlled, so that if I get an unusual result, I have a chance of not only interpreting it, but you might say trusting it. If I don't do good science, I cannot trust the numbers. So the science is really a kind of tool or a set of tools for getting a closer, clearer picture of who we are and what we're doing. And I really think the science by now has shown us without much question that all these things that, say, Teilhard de Chardin was talking about are really true. That's where we're headed. We're headed eventually to become an interconnected servant of the future by doing. It's really so simple. All we need to do is what neurons do. All they ever do is just be a neuron, the best neuron they can be. They always just do the job of a neuron. If we did the job of human beings, if we do our best to become fully human and to develop our potentials as human beings, can you imagine what if all of us were doing that? What would happen? We would have a paradise immediately. This will happen. It will be slow, but it's happening.
Do you believe in God? What are your thoughts about God?
Well,
are you a spiritual? Do you consider yourself a spiritual being?
Those are two different questions. I definitely consider myself to be spiritual.
Yeah, I made it
being.
easy for you. Now, the other question.
Well, God is, for me, it's a name for a possibility, a name for a source of all. It's a name for the universe, and so all of those things I find, I can easily say yes, indeed, I believe in God, but I have to be. I can only do that if I'm allowed to say who is God. I'm going to say what is God. God is the universe.
Okay.
And it is the source of everything. So I don't think of a God with, a long white beard and robes. That's not, I know that's important in a lot of people's conception of what God might be. But for me, that makes God too small and too narrow. I think God is bigger than all the ideas that the individual religions have of God. God is, may well have created man, but man creates God in man's image, and that's a mistake as far as I'm concerned. I certainly believe in this powerful creative force that somehow is manifested as all that is. But
because it's a very orderly universe. Something had to create it, this way that everything is working and the stars are not falling one on another, and the sun is shining, and then the moon is, there is an order in this stuff. So who made this order?
Right. Well, the universe is another name for consciousness. What I was saying before is that consciousness is fundamental. It is where everything begins. And so it has to be orderly. Otherwise, it wouldn't be conscious. Something like that. Now, these are...
So what is the field? If this is consciousness, what is the unified field or the field?
Well, these are such difficult concepts in a way. It's easy to believe that when we name something, we have understood it. Yeah. And field is a wonderful name for a variety of different kinds of things. In standard physical science, electromagnetics, things like radio and television can be easily understood in terms of fields. We can understand the relationship of moon and earth and the planets and the sun very nicely because we understand, we have created the concept of gravity, which is as a field. Mm-hmm. So consciousness, I think, can also be construed or thought of as a field. There is a field of consciousness. I like the word, but it's not the same field as an electromagnetic field. It's not the nature of the field of consciousness is in some ways similar, but other ways very different from the field of electromagnetics that transmits radio with signals. So we
it's like the field of fields.
The field of fields. I love it. The universal field.
Yeah.
I actually am convinced that there is a step in scientific description that will come, I hope, soon. And that will be something that has to do with information. Information is something we understand in a certain sense, in a way, almost as well as we understand matter and energy, but not quite yet, because we don't, because we haven't encapsulated the idea of information in a scientific, mathematical way that allows us to be utterly clear, perfectly clear when we're talking to each other about it. But I think it has to be coming very soon because information has become vastly more important as science has created these new interconnections that we're using here to talk to each other across 5,000 miles with so we're transmitting tremendous amounts of information, but we're also transmitting tremendous amounts of something we, I think, can easily and happily agree to call meaning. Information is sometimes thought of as, is it 1 or 0? Is it off or on? And that's a nice use of the term information, but information is bigger than that. So consciousness is probably a field of information. And if and when, I think it's when, pretty soon now, we have a more solid and clear understanding of information in the sense of meaning, then we will also have a better grasp on what consciousness is and what a consciousness field might be like. And we might be able to begin to write the equations for a field of consciousness and how your field of consciousness interacts with mine. So I've gone on quite a bit about field. I hope my optimism is correctly placed. I hope that we really will zero in on the meaning of these terms, consciousness, information, and field, and put them together in a kind of composite, which will allow us to talk about and understand these amazing kinds of interconnections that human beings have.
So we have like a few minutes more, and I want to talk a little bit about the experiment in Jerusalem that you did with ציפי and Lynn and Professor Kroktov, and thousands of people from all over the world, with the guidance of the meditation that Lynn did from England, and hundreds of people who were sitting in Jerusalem in a conference room, and you measure, and they all prayed for peace. In 3 languages, in English and Arabic and Hebrew, and there were, people all over, also in Arab countries, that were participating and chanting and doing the same intention of peace. And I know that it's all going to be in the movie. That will come out soon. But if you can tell me, and I know that you measured, there were a few measurements taking care in all kinds of places all over the world. And can you say, not with the specification, what did you see, or what did the machines sensed at that particular event?
I have done measurements. And what that amounts to is, because my network of random number generators is always producing data, I just take the period of time, which is important in some sense in this case, because a large number of people synchronize themselves and feel the same emotions, pray the same prayers practically, even though it's different languages. So that's a very sharp and powerfully focused period of time, which I can isolate, and then I can say this is a period of time, 1 hour, beginning at 1300, ending at 1400. I don't know exactly the time, and then I go to the database, the archive of data from my network, and extract the data corresponding to that. What I've found in several experiments like this is that instead of having the normal course of random variation, what we call a random walk with a level trend, there will be a deviation, a kind of departure from this expected line to downward trend, sometimes upward trend. But in the case of these focused meditation events, it tends to be a downward trend. And it becomes, after a period of time, after we have gathered data from a number of cases like that, we can, you might say, amplify the very small signal and see that this is a significant departure of the random number generators, apparently because of the prayers and good wishes of a large number of people with a shared intention.
Okay, and when you say that the graphs went down, what does it mean?
Well, the meaning of down and up isn't all that clear. The closest I can come to explaining the meaning, you might say, of down is that we see that very often in focused intention meditation events where people are coming together with purpose and with a very heartfelt dedication to a shared positive goal. That's corresponds very often to this departure from expectation in a downward direction. What that means is that in statistical terms, what we're looking at is correlations, and correlations can be positive correlations or negative correlations, and it doesn't have any negative and positive sound like they might have meaning, but they don't.
It's only numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Positive correlation may be bigger numbers, and negative correlations smaller numbers. Positive correlations might produce literally positive deviations like +1 or +3, and negative correlations -1 or -3. They have the same value statistically. Okay. And it's only we get a little confused in our language because we just don't have a separated way of talking about negative deviations. We use the same word that seems like a bad direction. It's not. It's just a
So what you say that you see that something happened, but does it have a meaning to this world, to the violence in this area, to what we people can do about our lives day to day?
I think it does. I think it.
Especially here, I'm talking in the Middle East, where everything is explosive.
Right. Well, there's two things that come to mind. One of them is first that we have some impact on the world. It's a very strange and sort of isolated bit of scientific world, these random number generators, but they're physical. They're very real. They have a behavior that is like cars and trucks, except that it's very small and it's electronic. So we change the way they behave by
the way that we think,
by the way that we behave.
The way that we talk, that we intend, that we talk to one another, that we share ideas, that we love. It has an impact on the world. That's what you say, on the world consciousness.
Right. And that means that our consciousness, as I was saying before, is not confined inside our bodies, inside our skulls. It reaches out into the world. Sometimes it's touching other people. And when we gather as groups, we have another form, a bigger group consciousness that also reaches out into the world. And it touches the real world and changes it. Now, one way of interpreting the way the data change is that the deviations in a negative correlation that shows in these downward trends they're smaller deviations. If you think of a bell curve, most of the time the random number generators are producing numbers that are kind of in the middle. Sometimes they extend out this way, or extend out quite far. What the negative deviation means is that this spreading out of the distribution of these correlations is smaller. Instead of spreading them out by having bigger deviations, we have smaller, you might say, calmer deviations. Mm-hmm. So maybe the meditation and the prayer presents a calming influence in the world. Mm. I think the transcendental meditation people have done experiments where their analysis was done specifically to find out if things like acts of war or police activities, car crashes, various kinds of unfortunate events, whether those might be lessened if a large number of experienced meditators just sit in meditation. Are you aware? You probably
Yes.
know.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So, I mean, what you folks and Lynn and ציפי were doing is basically that same kind of thing, without the mantra.
Yes. Tell me, did you think about sending one of these devices, by NASA to the outer space to check there? Is there a possibility to do it?
Well,
to see how the aliens are feeling.
The idea has come up. It's not something we never thought about, but it's just something that's not very practical. It takes a huge amount of money, one way to put it, to get anything into space. So unless you're part of, you're part of a weather satellite or some kind of government spy satellite or the space station experiments, 3 or 4 times people with connections have tried to get one of our random number generators onto a space flight. But they've never been able to succeed.
Well, we can pray for it, It's interesting.
But my view of that kind of thing is, first the question: what is it that we would be asking, and how would we do the science?
What is the scientific question?
Right. I'm not entirely sure what it would be. Other than this, it would put a random number.
Are there other consciousnesses in the universe that we can connect with?
That there's a very interesting aspect of the science that we haven't talked about. But if you think about the random number generators, first we started with them in the lab. They were 1 meter away, and people were able to affect them. Then we put them into groups, and they were sometimes 10 meters or 100 meters away. Then we looked at Diana's funeral. Then they were thousands of kilometers away from the people who were speaking or marching in the funeral procession. So, and with my network, those devices, which are placed around the world, are some are within a few hundred meters, but most are thousands of kilometers separated from each other. So what we're talking about is a phenomenon which is non-local. It isn't related to distance the way we think of distance normally.
Yeah.
So in other words, the consciousness, which is affecting the way these devices behave, is a kind of non-local entity. It doesn't have a spatial location. In fact, it doesn't even have a temporal location, but that's a more complicated question. We can do things that show up in data yesterday or tomorrow. But for these experiments, we try to keep it simple because it's already hard. So we keep it simple and say, we're looking at a network, and we're looking at correlations between devices that may be separated by great distances. So the end of the extreme version of the story says, if we did have one on the moon, there's no reason why the non-local effect wouldn't also affect the one on the moon, or if we send it out into space. Now, if we turn that around, we can ask the question you were asking: are there consciousnesses out in the universe that we have?
Are we interconnected with them also?
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's even though it might not be terribly easy or very obvious how to ask that question, I think we can.
Yeah.
There probably, for example, I'll just say a possibility. If we have data like I have, we can make an experiment. We can say, if there were an alien intelligence, another intelligence out in the universe that was interacting with us, what form would that take? And then what kind of pattern should that create in what otherwise should be a random sequence? And if I can come up with a reasonable notion about what kind of pattern it should create, I can look for the pattern. I have 20 years worth of these random numbers. So over the 20 years, maybe somebody did send a signal. If we had an idea what that signal would be like.
You can go backwards and check it out, you see.
Oh yeah, the data, we have data from 1997, 98 until now. So anytime, so maybe somebody sent us a message and we just didn't know, and so we didn't look for it yet.
So we have to wrap it up, talking about messages. If there were one message that you want to share, for the final message of this talk, of this interview, what would it be?
The human being is a beautiful creature if we allow that human being to develop his or her full potential. We should love each other. We should provide a loving environment for our children. We should talk with each other, communicate deeply with each other, and become one with each other.
Wow. Well, Dr. Rog'er Nilsson, thank you very much for this interview and for our shared intention to do some bridging between science and spirituality and inspiration and practical things, like the talk show, practical inspiration.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, Orly.
Thank you.
It's so nice to know how many people there are and how the number is growing of people who are sharing this intention for a brighter future.
Yes, and I hope we are doing our part in it to spread the word that there is a bright future for us.
Oh, yes.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And bye-bye.
Bye-bye.